I do have Steve Brown, the Bald Futurist, with me, and we wanted to just talk about the future and like where we're going to see this go, um, and as a way of just putting our minds in the right place. So, Steve, first, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So, hi, everybody. My name is Steve Brown. I spent 30 years in high tech, most of that with Intel in strategic planning roles. I was Intel's chief evangelist and also one of their two futurists. So I spend my time thinking about what's the world going to be like to live in 5, 10, 15 years from now. So I'm always looking out beyond the sort of short-term horizon. And I left Intel in 2016. I now have my own speaking consulting business. Not so much speaking these days. There's not many events for me to go and stand on a keynote stage at. But I offer consulting, coaching services for companies that are trying to figure out how do they innovate their way through this current situation, and how do they innovate their way out of recession. That's going to be the next challenge that we all face. And I'm also an author. I wrote a book that came out a couple months ago called the Innovation Ultimatum. I figured it'd be relevant for this time, how technology will combine to offer tools for innovators to drive innovation into every aspect of their business. I didn't realize quite how relevant it was going to be now that we're into 2020, because as we'll talk about in a minute, this is going to accelerate innovation across the board.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's where we need to be thinking, and the whole objective of this hackathon is to really start looking at how we're going to move forward. So, Steve, I got just a handful of questions for you. So, this is an extraordinary time, as we all know. So, like, how do you fundamentally think that this changes us? And I know we will have a lot of these interviews where we'll be talking about it in more specifics, but from like a more macro perspective, what do you see?
Well, this has been a huge shock, right, to the system, to us as individuals, to businesses, to society at large. And I think there's a couple of ways to think about this. This time, to me, is the great pause. Right, this is the time when we've all been forced to spend more time in our houses, and to really think about our value systems, what is important to us as individuals, and the fragility of modern life and the system that surrounds it has been laid bare in front of our eyes. And that, with that comes this feeling of a complete lack of control, right? That illusion that we had over control in our lives has just evaporated in front of us. So that has an impact on us as individuals, as we realize we need to build more resilience into our own lives, and that'll show up in lots of different ways. People will, for years, have more toilet paper than they used to. They'll keep their pantries stocked better. They probably will have, they'll change their strategy with regard to how much cash they keep on hand. The same way that the Great Generation Depression, for decades after the Depression, kept money underneath their mattresses, literally. These types of events place long-lasting impressions on us all. So we're all going to be shaped by this in ways big and small. I think it has eroded trust. Whether it's their fault or not, it's eroded trust in brands and institutions, in government particularly, that all of those groups are going to have to earn back. And that fragility that we've all been confronted with, it's not just at an individual level. Businesses and organizations have also realized how fragile their operations are. Whether you are a pizza business or a hospital, you are realizing that maybe you weren't quite as resilient as you thought you were. So that, I think, is the biggest takeaway for this, for all of us, is that we need to build much more resilience into our society, into our businesses, into our communities as we can.
Yeah, and I mean, we're I think Denise, I talked to a restaurant owner in San Francisco. She's one of the videos that we have and that we'll be airing later. And yeah, just talking about just the incredible impact that happened. 90% of revenue just going away. And people are gonna be hey, that can happen. So that's, I think that's going to be, it's going to be with us for a while. And I one other thing just that I was reminded of is my grandfather, who lived through the Great Depression. Whenever we were at his house trying to, figure out what ice cream we wanted to have, he would just say, "Hey, be thankful you're having ice cream," And so even those small things, 70 years later, that's what he was telling us. So it'll be crazy. So the second question, given that this has happened, now globally, what do you think is going to be different going forward?
So as well as thinking about this time as the great pause, where we're all getting a chance to reflect, and everything from, if you live in LA, seeing blue sky for the first time in 30 years, there's lots of ways that we are reflecting. I think we can also think about this time as the great accelerator. And we're going to see things that were going to happen anyway happen much faster. So the time frame of my book was focused on this next decade. The things that I talk about in my book, I think, are going to happen in 5 to 7 years instead of 10, maybe quicker in some other cases. What do I mean by that? So when you put pressure on a system, and there's a fair amount of pressure on our system right now, when you put pressure on a system, it tends to lead to innovation. You don't have to look very far back in history to World War II to see what happened when we put extreme circumstances in front of the world, and huge amounts of innovation came out of that. So in World War II, we have modern air travel to thank for that. Jet engines, pressurized cabins, radar systems, air traffic control, all came out of World War II. Rockets came out of World War II. We wouldn't have GPS and Uber without the rockets that got accelerated as a result of World War II. So those things would probably have happened anyway, but they happened far more quickly because of World War II. So it is going to be a great accelerator of innovation. Innovation, why and how? Well, we talked about resilience, using technology to build resilience into organizations, whatever those organizations are. And we can talk about that a bit more in a minute. Using technology to build new business models. If you're a pizza company, you've had to build a new business model already, right? If you are selling cars, you've had to build a new business model. Building new channels, building new capabilities. Doing things to rise to the current challenge. But the secondary part of this challenge is the economic challenge that's going to come. And the best way to push your business through recession and to catapult yourself on a growth trajectory out of the other side of recession is to invest and innovate your way through it. It is not to save and cut. So innovation to drive automation, to drive digitization of the customer journey from end to end. So every business on the planet, no matter what industry they are in, now needs to make sure that their customer journey, from finding out about your product or service through purchase, delivery, fulfillment, customer service, loyalty program, whatever it might be, end to end, that whole thing has now to be digital. No ifs, ands, or buts. You have to do that, right? Whether that is healthcare provision, whether that is teaching, it doesn't matter. It has to be done. And we've already seen some accelerations in that area. So telehealth services have seen a major uptick. Online education is happening through necessity. Home grocery delivery services are happening. So automation of those processes, digitization of those business processes is going to accelerate and accelerate dramatically. So that's the biggest change that I see coming out of this. And on an optimistic note, I mean, this is a shitty time, right? This is not fun for anybody. no matter how much this has touched you, whether it has made somebody you care about sick, perhaps you've lost them to coronavirus, or this is a difficult economic time for you, or you're just sick of sitting in your own house, right? It hits us at different levels. It's not a fun time. So to look forward and think, well, okay, this sucks, but innovation and the acceleration of really cool stuff that was going to happen anyway, but we get it now years earlier, is kind of the silver lining here. And that's what everybody who's on this Zoom right now, and on this YouTube call right now, this is what you're signing up to help do. So bravo, thank you. Let's innovate our way out of this mess.
Yeah, well, I love that. Love the optimistic viewpoint. I mean, that's like, in a time of, of sadness, honestly. I mean, like being able to be optimistic and get things done, is incredibly important. And so that's really what we're doing here. And, hats off to everybody that signed up for this and is going to be building things for sure. And I mean, a lot of the things that you touched on, are covered in these videos. I mean, specifically, we have 4 different tracks. We have the medical response track, we have the education track, we have health and wellness, and we have small business. And so, in each of those, there's videos for each of those, resources in the Slack channel that the teams are in. To really get those ideas started. Like there's going to be, there's been a fundamental change that's happened, and there are opportunities, out there for people to, solve problems and create meaningful things. So Steve, there's, we're the whole next part of this, webinar and YouTube live stream is going to talk about like some of the specific problems in different areas. But again, from a macro perspective, what are some of the big problems, that you see needing to be solved as a result of this pandemic?
Sure. So the big picture here is, and it comes back to this idea of resilience, is how do we collectively now build a pandemic-ready world? This is not a one-off event. We had some shots across our bow with SARS and Ebola. Now we have a big one. Bill Gates has warned us that we should expect this maybe as often as every generation. And this current pandemic is not going to go away once it gets warm this summer. It may recede, but it's going to keep coming back until we can get a vaccine and get it widespread. So this is the new normal. And we should be ready for that. But we should be thinking forward to how do we make the world more resilient? How do we make it pandemic ready? And that means both a pandemic ready healthcare system that can scale when it comes under great demand, but also the system that surrounds the healthcare system also needs to be pandemic ready so that our economy is pandemic ready. Now, what does that mean? On the healthcare side, how do we do contact tracing? More automated contact tracing. You're already starting to see some moves there with APIs coming from Google and Apple to try. And the challenge here, by the way, is how do you do something for the common good, which contact tracing is all about, at the same time as balancing that against individual privacy? We're going to need tech solutions to help us think through that. We need to make a healthcare system that doesn't just rely on the brilliance of people, of the humans that work in that system and their dedication and compassion and all the awesomeness that we appreciate about the healthcare workers who are on the front line today. And by the way, my wife is a physician assistant, so I know a bit about the healthcare system as a result of that. But how do we complement that with technology to help elevate the capabilities of the healthcare system workers, to complement their activities, to build a learning healthcare system? I'll give you a couple of examples. So, recently it has become, through observation, through human observation, we have seen that laying patients on their front helps them to recover more quickly. We've also seen that in some younger patients, there is risk of blood clotting issues and stroke in younger patients. Those things have been observed by humans over time because they see different symptoms and they start to correlate those. Artificial intelligence is really good at spotting patterns in oceans of data and perhaps finding patterns that humans would not see, that would give us insights that we can then apply back to therapies, but also being able to see things more quickly than humans. So how do we build a learning healthcare system where every patient benefits from the experience we've had with every interaction between every treatment and every other patient that went before them, and complement the human intelligence with digital intelligence? So there's a lot of things we can do in the healthcare world to make it more pandemic ready and to scale better by complementing the human talent with machine capabilities. When it comes to the business side of things, small businesses in particular, they don't have an IT department, right? I am a small business. I don't have an IT department. It's me. I'm the IT department. Happens to be that I worked at Intel, so I can do some stuff, but I don't have the capability to go and build new platforms and capabilities. So think about yourselves as the world's IT department today. What can you do to build X as a service so that a small business out there that needs some new digital end-to-end service that doesn't have it today, instead of having an IT department, they can come to this hackathon and say, there's this thing that I now have that gives me a business capability to reach customers, to have a digital end-to-end journey that I didn't have before. You know, if you are a card dealer and your business model was people coming onto your forecourt and you give them a ride and then lay on the sales pitch, that's not a digital service, right? How do you complement that with digital capabilities? How do you move platforms into the cloud to give people the flexibility to work from home? How do we guard our supply chains and add track and trace? So transparency and traceability in supply chains. All of these capabilities are going to be needed by every business on the planet. And thinking about how do you build new business models and create new channels, and longer term, how do we propel ourselves out of this downturn, this economic downturn, by driving innovation into products and services for every industry to help us to create new demand for products and foment, economic activity that drives us all out of this as quickly as possible. So those are some thoughts on the big picture here, but how do we get ready to build a pandemic ready world, and what is your role in that today? If this is useful thinking, you can find me at Bald Futurist, easy to remember, baldfuturist.com. And I hope that you're going to come up with some amazing stuff today. So, my hat's off to you, and a round of applause to everybody that signed up for this today. I can't wait to see what you do.